Hello. Today is a very interesting topic. What would happen if Trump became the president of Russia and Putin is the president of America? Purely hypothetically, of course. Rick and Turanga reason.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really fascinating hypothetical scenario that's come up in some source material.
It really is. It's a thought experiment, basically asking us to imagine a pretty major switch on the world stage.
Exactly. The core idea is, well, quite something. Picture the U.S. being led by Vladimir Putin, while Russia is simultaneously led by Donald Trump.
Right. And the source isn't, trying to predict anything. It's using this swap to explore perceived differences.
Between the countries and maybe their leadership styles, it shows what that contrast might look like based purely on the source's perspective.
And our goal here is just to unpack what the source suggests this world would be like, sticking strictly to its details.
We're just exploring the idea impartially, looking at what the source itself puts forward.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into it. According to the source, what's the overall vision for these swapped countries? For the U.S. under Putin, it suggests a big shift, right?
Yeah, towards a much more centralized state-controlled system.
Yeah.
Prioritizing national power, stability, that kind of thing.
The source portrays it as, well, less overtly democratic, more focus on order, perhaps even suppressing dissent.
Framed, I guess, by the source as a kind of authoritarian efficiency model.
Meanwhile, Russia under Trump, the source suggests it becomes less predictable.
That's the word used. It paints a picture where policy is maybe more about personal loyalty, transactional deals.
Less focus on the traditional institutions, maybe? More on big published gestures?
Yeah, the source seems to imply it could lead to a more chaotic system there compared to now. More about individual gain, power dynamics, less about state ideology.
Interesting contrast. Now, this is where it really kind of hits home. The source looks at how life might change for ordinary people.
Right.
In the U.S., under this hypothetical Putin, it suggests life could feel more restrictive. Things like increased surveillance.
Less freedom of expression, definitely. And maybe a push for a very specific state-defined patriotism.
It really brings up that classic tension, doesn't it? Individual liberty versus state control. Daily life might feel quite constrained.
Yeah, conformity might be expected more publicly.
And what about people in Russia under this hypothetical Trump? The source points to a different kind of disruption.
Maybe more economic uncertainty. Sudden policy shifts hitting daily life.
Perhaps a focus on, individual success stories, but maybe the traditional social safety nets start to fray.
The source frames that as maybe an environment with unpredictable opportunities, but also unpredictable risks. A contrast to the U.S. side of this hypothetical.
Okay, let's shift to the social sphere. Society, culture. How does the source see that changing?
For the U.S. under Putin, it suggests a strong emphasis on sort of state-approved traditional values.
Which could potentially marginalize diverse voices or lifestyles?
Exactly. The source frames it as an effort to consolidate social norms, control the public conversation using state power, enforcing a specific cultural view.
And in Russia under Trump, the source suggests the social scene could become dominated by, spectacle, personality.
Public discussion might be louder, more performative, centered on the leader figure.
But maybe underlying freedoms are still curtailed, just in favor of loyalty rather than ideology.
That seems to be the angle. The source explores how celebrity and personality might reshape a culture, maybe less bound by old rules, but in the source's view, perhaps lacking clear principles too.
And finally, foreign policy. Big implications there. The source suggests the U.S. under Putin might pull back a bit, less focus on alliances like NATO.
Sort of isolationist in some ways, yeah. But also aggressively protective of its own perceived interests and sphere of influence.
The source presents it as a very pragmatic, power-focused approach. Alliances based purely on benefit, not shared values.
Transactional, really.
And Russia's foreign policy under Trump, according to the source.
Unpredictable again. And transactional. The source suggests challenging existing alliances, pursuing deals directly with leaders.
Generally creating a lot of volatility internationally.
Yeah, and if you connect that back, the source is basically asking us to think about the global impact. Two major powers taking such different but maybe equally disruptive paths.
So wrapping this up based purely on the source material, we've looked at its hypothetical swap, the overall vision, daily life, society, foreign policy.
Highlighting the shifts and contrasts the source itself focuses on. It's a framework it uses to compare perceived realities by flipping roles.
Right, so here's a final thought for you. drawn only from how this source sets up the hypothetical. By picking these leaders and focusing on these specific impacts, what does this thought experiment suggest about the perceived inherent differences between the two nations, or perhaps their leaders, according to the source's own framing? Something to think about.